Hello, it's Karen at the Cool Tool Studio, and I'm here today to share a fun seasonal project. Today I'm going to walk you through how to make these fun winter ornaments. We're going to start off by cutting cypress copper clay with cookie cutters, and then we're going to enamel them and accent them with mica powder. Here's what you're going to need for the clay working portion of this project. Some cypress copper clay, a clay board, an ultra clay pick, and then I'm going to be working with a 2.5mm precision hole punch, a clay hydrator, some cool slip, a clay roller, some sanding pads, and a tidy tray. Some clay thickness rolling frames, and then I just snuck out to my kitchen and borrowed some cookie cutters. But alternately, Cool Tools also sells some really fun festive templates that you can work with. I'm going to start this project off by rolling to 4 cards thickness. I've already treated my work surface and roller with cool slip, and I'm going to start with a 6 and work my way down to 4. I find I just have a little more control when you start slightly thicker and work your way down. And usually when I'm enameling on a project, I want them to be at least 3 cards thick, but since these ornaments are going to be larger than the usual jewelry object that I'm making, I'm going to make them 4 cards thick. And this was about 25 grams of clay, and I'm going to see if I can fit both a mitten and a stocking on this. And that should work just fine. I'm just going to take my cookie cutter and just press down. Make sure you get kind of all the corners, and then raise that straight up. And then I'm going to take my ultra clay pick along with the stocking form and cut out that shape. And then I'm using a 2.5mm precision hole punch, and a string will go nicely through that. You can use a thicker hole punch if you want to send a ribbon through your ornaments. Sometimes I like to start off these with a little bit of cool slip to get the clay out a little more easily. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball. It looks about center. You don't want to be too close to your edge. Looks like I left a little mark from the first time I was sizing it, but I'll be able to sand that away. And then I think the stocking looks cute when it kind of hangs from a corner. This guy out. And then I'm going to collect my edge and put it back in my hydrator to keep this clay nice and fresh. So next step is going to be to sand those edges and clean them up. So I'm going to allow these pieces to dry, and then we're going to sand the edges. So my copper shapes have dried and they're ready to be sanded. And I like the sanding pads because you can cut them down to a shape that's convenient for your project. And I'm going to start with fine. And fine is good for cleaning up any edges and kind of refining the shape of your piece. And the cookie cutters give you a pretty clean edge, but there was that one point up here where the cutter itself had an overlap in the metal that I'm going to sand out. So I'm going to go all the way around my edge. I'm not too worried about the faces of this piece since I'm going to be applying a generous coat of enamel. You won't really see the copper through it if you're working with opaque enamels. If you're going to be using transparent enamel, then you might want to spend some time making sure the surface looks good. So after fine, I'm going to move to super fine. And that just cleans up any scratches that were made from refining the shape with the fine. And I'm going to work my way down from super fine to ultra fine and then finally micro fine. So I'm going to finish up sanding this piece and then we'll talk about firing these pieces. When preparing for this project, I tested out several different firing schedules to see what would be the most successful. I was suspicious that the typical firing schedule wouldn't work out as well since these pieces are larger than the typical cypress copper clay project. What ended up working best was a slow ramp for the first phase of the firing. I ramped at 650 degrees per hour up to 650 and then held for 30 minutes. After that, I was able to do the full ramp up to 1600 to hold for 3 hours. I found that when I dove in and just did the full ramp for the first phase, I got some cracks along my edges. While those pieces are at the kiln, I have another mitten that's ready to go for enameling. So let's take a look at what we're going to need to enamel this piece. Here's what you're going to need for the enameling portion of this project. A spray bottle and some clear fire, surfactant, scale-X, and some Thompson unleaded enamels, an 80 mesh sifter, some stencils, a palette knife, a brush, and a container to mix in, a scotch-brite, some sponge applicators, mica powder, and liquitex thickening gel. So before you apply enamel, you want to make sure your piece is nice and clean. So I took this piece over to the sink and scrubbed it with a surfactant and a scotch-brite, and then thoroughly rinsed it. So now I'm ready to apply scale-X. And I just have a brush. I'm going to dip in the scale-X and brush it on. It doesn't have to be a very thick coat, but you don't want to be able to see through it. Make sure you come all the way out to your edges. And this just helps keep your piece from building a thick layer of oxidization on the side that isn't receiving enamel. That makes it easier to quick and move along to adding the next coat. So it's still a little thin for my first coat. scale-X, so I'm going to come over it again and add a little more. And again, this is just a protective coat, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just trying to make sure I'm distributing it fairly evenly over the piece. Get that little edge. So now I'm going to allow this to dry, and then I'm going to apply enamel to the other face. So my scale-X is dried, and I'm ready to apply enamel to the other face. And since this finished project is probably going to be visible from both sides, whether it's hanging from a tree or a rearview mirror, I'm going to apply the same color to both faces. So I'm going to be using Victoria Red today, but in order to get the enamel to adhere, I'm going to lay down some clear fire. And this is clear fire that's been mixed 50-50 with water. I'm just going to use the spray bottle to apply it. And then sometimes I'll just run my finger over it really quickly to make sure it comes all the way out to the edges. And putting my Victoria Red into my sifter. And I'm using an 80 mesh sifter because I'm not needing any detail. I'm not sifting through a stencil or anything. I'm just laying down a coat of enamel. So I'm making sure I come to those edges. And that looks like a pretty good coat. So I'm going to place this on a trivet to put it into my kiln and fire it. Today I'm firing at 1450, and Victoria Red's a slightly higher fire color, so it's going to be in the kiln a little bit longer than softer colors like blues. So just keep an eye on it and pull it when it glosses out to a nice even surface. So this is one layer of the Victoria Red, and I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to move on to enameling the other side. But before I do, I'm just going to take my fine sanding pad again and come along the edges, and I removed the oxidization there. Because if you don't, some of that black can flake off and land in your enamel and disturb the color. So just like before, I'm going to apply some clear fire and water. It's a little heavy on that side, so I'm going to spread it out. And then I'm going to sift on another coat of enamel. I usually do 2 passes over a piece. That way you get nice even color. Alright, so that looks good. I'm going to bring it over to my kiln to dry and then fire. While that piece is cooling down, I'm going to show you how I added the white accent to the stocking. And the stocking has a coat of Orient Red on both sides. And then I'm just going to take a dab of clear fire right from the bottle this time, just because I'm not applying it to the whole piece and this is easier. I'm just putting it along that top edge where the enamel will go. I have some quill white. I'm just going to sift it along that edge. And it's usually kind of fluffy, so there's not like a strain, so there's not like a straight clean cut line. So I kind of like to let it gradate out a little bit there. And then just knock off any excess. I think that looks pretty good, so I'm going to fire that on. So I have a coat of enamel on both sides now, and we're ready to apply the mica accents. When Jan Harrell came here and introduced the mica to us, I got so excited because I thought it would be perfect for the holiday season to add some sparkle. So I'm going to be mixing it in this container with the palette knife, and we're combining it with liquitex thickening gel. So Jan introduced me to the mica, and she was explaining that when you're combining the mica with the liquitex gel, that you kind of want to mix to a consistency that looks like frosting for applying it with this technique. I'm working with the Sparkle Gold. And a palette knife is really perfect for getting down into all the edges of this cup and thoroughly mixing. So you don't need a lot for this project. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to be applying this mica through stencils. And Cool Tools has lots of stencil options. This one's my favorite for the mitten ornament in particular. And I'm just going to take the sponge applicator and kind of pounce it around in there, make sure I'm covering that surface. And then I like to just take the lid or anything else that's kind of nearby and kind of dab it around again to make sure things are evenly distributed. So position your stencil where you'd like, and I kind of like to hold it taut and work an area and then scoot up and work another area. So I'm going to hold it down and start at the top here. And just spend some time making sure you get a nice even coat. If you want it to be nice and even, I guess alternately, if you like it kind of sparse looking, you could come through and leave it just like that. It's up to preference, but I want a nice coat so I can see the lines crisply for this project. So now I'm going to scoot down just a little bit. So just keep working your way down your piece and we'll catch up and see what this looks like before it should go in the kiln. So I lifted my stencil straight up and off, and you can tell kind of here at the bottom I wasn't holding it down as tightly and it's a little softer looking. I like the way that looks. If you wanted to correct it, you could scoot your edge and correct things with a brush. So when I go to fire this piece, I'm still having my kiln set to 1450, and you're firing the enamel to receive the mica powder. So if you're working with a color like Victoria Red that had to be in the kiln longer to fuse the enamel, it will have to be in just as long to accept the mica powder. So this piece has been fired and cooled, and since mica is fused into the enamel, only the bottom layer of the mica is going to actually fuse to your piece. So you can wipe off the excess with a damp cloth, or you can take this to the sink, and it'll still leave a really nice finish. There's just some extra there that needs to be removed after it's been fired. All right, so that's the finished look for this face. Since this is a two-sided piece, I'm going to repeat the application of mica to this face as well. So I'm just going to quickly walk through how I applied the mica to this piece as well. And I cleaned my sponge brush just by rinsing it really thoroughly with water, and that's how you clean the stencils as well before the acrylic dries. It's much easier to clean them up when it's wet. So I'm again just going to pounce the sponge applicator into the mica, and this one is Super Sparkle. Alright, so that looks like a good coat, and I'm going to fire this in. Here are my finished projects. I had a lot of fun with this project because there's so many different variations that you can try. For this snowflake, I used ozone blue and Super Sparkle. I used jungle green and Mayan gold on this tree, and then I used ozone blue again, but with a custom silver mica powder on this snowflake. These ornaments make great seasonal gifts. By changing out the cutter that you use, the enamel you lay down, or the mica powder you add, you'll be making a different piece each and every time. The possibilities are endless, so you'll be making something different for each and every person on your gift list. Thanks for watching.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.